The sound of a gunshot echoed through the vast Wyoming Territory plains, startling Grace Norwood and sending her beloved Palomino into a frenzied panic. It was 1878, and the promise of a new life in Cheyenne had vanished as quickly as the bullet that had grazed her horse's flank. Now, kneeling in the dust of the unforgiving trail, Grace sobbed over her dying companion as the setting sun painted the horizon in shades of fire and blood. Grace's trembling hands stroked the Palomino's golden mane. "Oh, Daisy," she whispered, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. "What am I going to do now?" The horse's breathing grew shallow, each exhale a painful reminder of how alone Grace truly was, miles from the nearest town with only the clothes on her back and a small satchel of belongings. The attack had come swiftly. 3 men, faces concealed behind bandanas, had demanded her money and valuables. When she explained she had nothing of worth, they'd become enraged, firing wildly as they rode away. A stray bullet had struck poor Daisy, and now Grace was stranded in the middle of nowhere as darkness approached. At 22, Grace had weathered many storms. Orphaned at 16, she'd spent years working as a seamstress in St. Louis until the promise of teaching positions out west had called to her adventurous spirit. But nothing had prepared her for this moment of utter desolation. As the last breath left Daisy's body, Grace collapsed beside her faithful companion, her shoulders heaving with sobs. The loneliness of the open range pressed in around her, a tangible weight on her chest. She didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were almost upon her. Startled, Grace looked up to see a tall figure on horseback silhouetted against the crimson sky. Fear gripped her heart had the bandits returned to finish what they'd started. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching slowly with hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Madam." The voice was gentle but firm, carrying the slight drawl of someone who'd spent his life in these territories. Grace scrambled backward, reaching for the small knife in her boot, the only protection she had left. "Stay back," she warned, her voice breaking. "I mean you no harm," the man said, stopping a respectful distance away. As he stepped closer, the dying light revealed a rugged face weathered by sun and wind, kind eyes, and a concerned expression. He wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, dusty denim, a worn leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back to reveal sandy brown hair. "You'll never walk again alone," he said softly, his eyes taking in her desperate situation. "Not while I draw breath." Grace's knife hand trembled. "Who are you?" "Wyatt Anderson," he replied, removing his hat in respect. "Foreman at the Circle Pine Ranch just over that ridge." He nodded toward the west. "I heard a shot, came to investigate." Grace hesitated, weighing her options. She had nowhere to go, night was falling, and predators both animal and human roamed these plains. "I'm Grace," she finally said, lowering her knife. "Grace Norwood. I was on my way to Cheyenne when bandits attacked. They shot my horse." Wyatt's jaw tightened as he glanced at the dead Palomino. "I'm mighty sorry about your horse, Miss Norwood. No one should lose a friend that way." He approached slowly and knelt beside Daisy, respectfully placing a hand on the horse's neck. "She was a fine animal. She was all I had," Grace whispered, fresh tears welling. Wyatt stood, decision made. "It'll be dark soon. My ranch is closer than town. You can stay there tonight, get your bearings." He offered his hand. "My mother and sister are there. You'll be safe, I promise." Grace hesitated. Her parents had warned her about the dangers a woman faced alone in the world, but what choice did she have? She placed her trembling hand in his, noting the calloused palm and gentle grip. "I need to get my things," she said, moving to untie her satchel from Daisy's saddle. Wyatt helped her gather her few possessions, then whistled for his horse. The chestnut gelding trotted over obediently. "This is Thunder," Wyatt said, patting the horse's neck. "He's strong enough to carry us both to the ranch." He helped Grace mount, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at the unfamiliar proximity to a man, but his respectful manner reassured her. With one arm securely around her waist to keep her steady, Wyatt clicked his tongue and Thunder started forward. "What about Daisy?" Grace asked, looking back at her fallen companion. "I'll send men back tomorrow," Wyatt promised. "We'll see she's properly buried." As they rode toward the Circle Pine Ranch, Grace felt the warmth of Wyatt's solid presence behind her, a stark contrast to the cold fear that had gripped her just moments before. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them and Wyatt's steady breathing gradually calmed her racing heart. "You mentioned you were headed to Cheyenne," Wyatt said after they'd ridden in silence for a while. "Family there?" Grace shook her head. "No family anywhere." "I'm to be the new schoolteacher, or I was supposed to be," she sighed. "I don't know if I'll make it now without a horse. School doesn't start for another month," Wyatt replied. "We'll figure something out." The use of "we" wasn't lost on Grace. This stranger had somehow decided her problems were now his concern. It should have alarmed her, but instead, it kindled a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The Circle Pine Ranch appeared as they crested a gentle hill, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Lantern lights spilled from the windows, creating a beacon in the gathering darkness. As they approached, a woman appeared on the porch, her silhouette framed by the golden light behind her. "Wyatt, is that you bringing company at this hour?" "It is, Mother," Wyatt called back. "We have a visitor in need of shelter." Martha Anderson was a handsome woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the same kind eyes as her son. She took one look at Grace's tear-stained face and immediately ushered her inside the warm kitchen. "You poor thing," she clucked, helping Grace remove her dust-covered jacket. "Wyatt, fetch some warm water. Emma," she called toward another room. "Set another place for supper." A young woman of about 19 appeared, her curious eyes taking in Grace's disheveled appearance. "I'm Emma," she said with a friendly smile. "Wyatt's sister." Within minutes, Grace found herself seated at a sturdy wooden table with a bowl of hearty stew before her, fresh bread, and a cup of strong coffee. The simple kindness of the Anderson family brought fresh tears to her eyes. Now," Martha said gently, patting Grace's hand. "You're safe here. Eat your fill, and then you can tell us what happened if you're up to it." Over the meal, Grace related her story, her journey from St. Louis, the teaching position awaiting her in Cheyenne, and the attack that had left her stranded. The Andersons listened attentively, expressions darkening at the mention of the bandits. "Sounds like the Harker brothers," Wyatt said, exchanging a glance with his mother. "They've been causing trouble all through the territory." "Sheriff's been after them for months," Emma added. After supper, Emma showed Grace to a small but comfortable bedroom. "These are my clothes," she said, laying out a nightgown and a simple day dress. "They might be a bit short on you, but they're clean." "You're all too kind," Grace said, overwhelmed by their generosity. Emma smiled. "Wyatt's the kind one. He's always bringing home strays, though usually they're four-legged." She paused. "He's a good man, my brother, the best I know." After Emma left, Grace washed away the dust and tears of the day, changed into the borrowed nightgown, and sat on the edge of the bed. For all the trauma she'd experienced, she felt strangely at peace. Outside her window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the gentle nickering of horses in the barn, and the whisper of the wind through the pines that gave the ranch its name. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Yes, it's Wyatt. May I speak with you for a moment?" Grace wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. Wyatt stood in the hallway, respectfully keeping his distance. "I just wanted to let you know that I'll ride into town tomorrow," he said. "I'll send a telegram to Cheyenne, let them know what happened and that you're safe but delayed." "Thank you," Grace replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I don't know how I'll repay your kindness." Wyatt smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "No need for that. Out here we look after each other. It's the only way to survive." He hesitated. "Rest well, Miss Norwood." "Grace," she corrected. "Please call me Grace." His smile widened. "Good night, Grace." As she settled into the comfortable bed, Grace reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. What had begun as the worst day of her journey had somehow led her to this place of unexpected kindness. Her last thought before drifting off to sleep was of Wyatt's promise. "You'll never walk again alone." For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she felt something like hope. Morning arrived with the crow of a rooster and the delicious smell of coffee and bacon. Grace dressed in Emma's borrowed clothes and made her way to the kitchen, where Martha was already busy at the stove. "Good morning, dear," Martha greeted her warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Grace admitted, accepting a cup of coffee. "May I help with anything?" Martha smiled. "You can set the table. Emma's gathering eggs and Wyatt's seeing to the morning chores." As they worked together, Grace learned more about the Andersons. The ranch had been started by Wyatt's father, who had passed away 3 years earlier. Since then, Wyatt had taken over running the operation with remarkable success, despite being only 26 years old. "He works too hard," Martha confided. "Barely takes time for himself." "He seems very dedicated," Grace observed. "That he is," Martha agreed, "but a man needs more than work to make a life worth living." The knowing look she gave Grace made her blush. After breakfast, Wyatt prepared to ride into town. "I should be back by mid-afternoon," he told Grace. "Is there anything specific you need from town?" Grace thought of her meager savings, most of which had been in her saddlebags. "I lost almost everything in the attack," she admitted. "I don't suppose they sell teaching credentials at the general store." Wyatt laughed, a rich, warm sound that made something flutter in Grace's chest. "I'll see what I can do," he promised. "In the meantime, make yourself at home." With Wyatt gone, Grace helped Martha with household chores and spent time with Emma, who eagerly showed her around the ranch. The Circle Pine was larger than Grace had initially realized, with over 500 head of cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands. "Wyatt's built it up since Pa died," Emma explained proudly as they watched cowboys working with a herd in a distant pasture. "Everyone said a young man couldn't handle such a big operation, but he proved them wrong." "He seems very capable," Grace observed. Emma gave her a sidelong glance. "He's the best catch in 3 counties, according to the local girls. Not that he notices. Too busy with the ranch." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not looking for a catch, Emma. I'm meant to be a schoolteacher in Cheyenne." Emma just smiled knowingly. "Life has a way of changing our plans, doesn't it?" By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, bringing the threat of a summer storm. Martha watched the sky with concern. "I hope Wyatt makes it back before that hits," she said, folding laundry on the porch with Grace. As if summoned by his mother's words, Wyatt appeared, riding fast toward the ranch. Behind him, ominous clouds churned and lightning flashed. "Just in time," Martha said with relief as Wyatt dismounted, leading Thunder toward the barn. Grace followed him, curious about his trip to town. She found him in the barn, removing Thunder's saddle. "Did you send the telegram?" she asked. Wyatt nodded. "I did. The school board in Cheyenne sends their sympathies and says they'll hold the position for you. I also spoke with Sheriff Davis about the Harker brothers. He's organizing a posse to track them down." "Thank you," Grace said sincerely. Wyatt hung up Thunder's tack and turned to face her. "I brought you something." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Grace opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal and a pen. "Oh, Wyatt," she breathed. "You mentioned you like to write," he said, a hint of shyness in his manner. "I thought you might want to record your adventures." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Grace deeply. "It's perfect," she said, running her fingers over the smooth leather cover. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. The moment was broken by a tremendous crack of thunder that made Grace jump. Wyatt smiled. "We should get inside before we get soaked." They made it to the house just as the heavens opened, releasing a deluge that drummed on the roof and streamed down the windows. The storm confined everyone indoors for the remainder of the day, creating an unexpectedly intimate atmosphere as they gathered around the fireplace, telling stories and playing cards. Grace observed Wyatt with his family, noting his gentle teasing of Emma, his attentiveness to his mother, and the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. He wasn't like the polished city men she'd known in St. Louis. There was something authentic about him, a groundedness that drew her in despite her reservations. As days turned into a week, Grace found herself settling into life at the Circle Pine. She helped Martha with the household tasks, learned to gather eggs without getting pecked by the temperamental hens, and even tried her hand at making biscuits, with mixed results that had everyone laughing. Wyatt took her on rides around the property, showing her the beauty of the Wyoming landscape, rolling hills covered in wildflowers, crystal-clear streams teeming with fish, and majestic pine forests that provided the ranch its name. During these excursions, they talked about everything from books to politics, discovering a shared love of learning and similar views on many subjects. "How did a cowboy become so well-read?" Grace asked one afternoon as they rested their horses by a stream. Wyatt smiled. "My father believed education was important even for ranchers. He had books shipped from back east. During winter, when ranch work slowed, we'd read by the fire every night. He sounds like a wonderful man." "He was," Wyatt agreed, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "He taught me that being a man isn't about how tough you are, but about doing what's right, even when it's difficult." Grace found herself increasingly drawn to Wyatt. His kindness, intelligence, and quiet strength represented everything she'd ever wanted in a companion, but had never found among her suitors in St. Louis. One evening, 2 weeks after her arrival, Grace sat on the porch swing, writing in the journal Wyatt had given her. The setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Wyatt joined her, settling on the swing with a respectful distance between them. "Writing about your adventures?" he asked. Grace nodded. "And about the people I've met." She hesitated, then added softly, "Especially one person who showed extraordinary kindness to a stranger." Their eyes met, and Wyatt's expression grew serious. "Grace, I need to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, the school in Cheyenne expects you in 2 weeks." "I've arranged for a stagecoach ticket." He paused. "But I was wondering if you might consider staying." Grace's breath caught. "Staying?" "The town council met yesterday. Our school teacher, Mrs. Holloway, is retiring. They're looking for a replacement." Wyatt looked down at his hands. "It's not as big a school as Cheyenne, but the children here need education just as much." "You want me to teach here?" Grace clarified, both touched and confused by the offer. Wyatt took a deep breath and met her eyes. "I want you to stay, Grace, these past weeks, having you here." He struggled to find the right words. "The ranch hasn't felt this alive since before my father passed. Mother smiles more. Emma has a friend, and I—" He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her. "I've never met anyone like you." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Wyatt, I'm not asking for anything," he quickly assured her. I want you to know there's a place for you here if you want it. The teaching position is yours regardless of anything else." The sincerity in his eyes moved her deeply. In the short time she'd known him, Wyatt Anderson had shown her more consideration and respect than any man she'd ever met. "I need time to think," she said honestly. Wyatt nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course." That night Grace lay awake, her thoughts tumultuous. She had come west seeking independence and adventure, not to be swept off her feet by a rancher. And yet, the thought of leaving the Circle Pine, of leaving Wyatt, filled her with unexpected sadness. The following morning, Grace sought out Martha, finding her in the garden picking vegetables. "May I join you?" Grace asked. "Always," Martha smiled, handing her a basket. "You seem thoughtful this morning." "Wyatt told me about the teaching position in town," Grace admitted. "He asked me to consider staying." Martha's hands stilled on a tomato plant. "And what are you thinking?" "I'm not sure. I had plans, a path I thought I would follow." Martha nodded. "Life rarely follows the paths we lay out for it, dear. When I met Wyatt's father, I was engaged to another man, a banker from Denver. Everyone thought it was a perfect match." Grace looked up in surprise. "What happened?" "Joshua Anderson rode into town one day looking for cattle to buy. We crossed paths outside the general store." Martha smiled at the memory. He helped me carry my packages home, and by the time we reached my door, I knew my life had changed forever. You broke your engagement. It was the hardest and easiest decision I ever made, Martha confirmed. My family was scandalized, society whispered, but I never regretted it, not for one day. Grace considered this. How did you know it was right? Martha touched her heart. I just knew. Some things can't be explained with reason alone. She paused. I've seen how my son looks at you, Grace. I haven't seen that light in his eyes since before his father died. Grace felt her cheeks warm. I care for him too, she admitted. More than I expected to. Then perhaps the question isn't whether to stay or go, Martha suggested gently. Perhaps it's what future would bring you the most joy. That afternoon, Grace saddled a gentle mare Wyatt had been teaching her to ride and headed for her favorite spot on the ranch, a hilltop overlooking the valley, crowned by a single massive pine tree. She needed space to think, to listen to her heart away from distractions. From this vantage point, she could see the entire circle pine spread out below the main house, barn and outbuildings forming the heart of the operation, surrounded by lush pastures dotted with cattle. Beyond lay the small town where she might teach, and far in the distance, the road that would take her to Cheyenne. Grace leaned against the trunk of the old pine, her journal open on her lap. She began to write, pouring out her conflicted feelings. She had come west seeking independence, yet found herself drawn to this place, these people. This man. Was choosing to stay really surrendering her dreams, or was it embracing new ones she hadn't known to wish for? Lost in thought, she didn't notice Wyatt's approach until his horse nickered a greeting to her mare. He dismounted and approached slowly, giving her time to gather her thoughts. I thought I might find you here, he said, settling beside her with a respectful distance between them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching an eagle soar on the thermals above the valley. I've been thinking about your offer, Grace finally said. And? Wyatt's voice was carefully neutral, though she could sense his tension. Grace turned to face him. When I left St. Louis, I was seeking something. I thought it was independence, adventure, a life shaped by my own choices rather than society's expectations. Wyatt nodded, listening intently. What I didn't realize, she continued, was that I was also seeking a place to belong, somewhere that felt like home. She took a deep breath. I think I've found that here, hope kindled in Wyatt's eyes. Does that mean you'll stay, take the teaching position? Yes, Grace said, smiling through sudden tears, if the offer still stands. Joy transformed Wyatt's face. It does. He hesitated, then took her hand. Grace, I need to be honest with you. My interest in you staying goes beyond the school needing a teacher. I know, she said softly. From the moment I saw you beside that fallen horse, something inside me changed, Wyatt continued, his voice husky with emotion. I know it hasn't been long, but I feel like I've known you my whole life. Grace squeezed his hand. I feel it too. Wyatt's eyes searched hers. I'm not asking for promises, I just want a chance. A chance to court you properly, to see if what I feel, what I think we both feel, might grow into something lasting. Grace felt a certainty she had never experienced before. The path that had seemed so clear when she left St. Louis had led her here, to this moment, this man. Perhaps this was where she had been headed all along. I'd like that, she whispered. Wyatt's smile could have outshone the sun. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened into something more certain. When they parted, both were breathless. I've wanted to do that since the day we met, Wyatt admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Grace laughed softly. Even when I was covered in dust and tears, especially then, he confirmed. You were the bravest, most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. They stayed on the hilltop until sunset painted the sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple. As they rode back to the ranch side by side, Grace felt a sense of rightness that transcended logic or careful planning. Sometimes, she realized, the greatest adventures came not from following a predetermined path, but from having the courage to forge a new one. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Grace moved into a small but comfortable room at the town's boarding house, maintaining propriety while she settled into her new role as the local schoolteacher. The townspeople welcomed her warmly, especially once they learned how she had come to their community. The school itself was a modest one-room building serving 28 children of varying ages. Grace threw herself into preparing for the fall term, cleaning and organizing the classroom, reviewing the available books, and developing lesson plans. In the evenings, Wyatt would often drive her back to the ranch for dinner with his family. Their courtship progressed with a sweet mix of old-fashioned propriety and deepening intimacy. They shared long conversations, gentle touches, and increasingly passionate kisses when they could find moments of privacy. By the time autumn painted the landscape in brilliant golds and reds, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home not just in Wyoming, but in Wyatt's heart. On a crisp October evening, exactly 3 months after their first meeting, Wyatt took Grace back to the hilltop where they had shared their first kiss. He spread a blanket beneath the pine tree and presented her with a picnic basket filled with her favorite foods. As they watched the sunset, Wyatt took her hands in his. "Grace Norwood, when I found you that day beside your fallen horse, I promised you would never walk alone again. Today, I want to make that promise permanent." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "This was my grandmother's ring," he explained. "My father gave it to my mother, and now I'm offering it to you." Tears filled Grace's eyes as Wyatt continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Grace. I love your courage, your kindness, your intelligence, and your spirit. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Grace answered without hesitation, her heart full to bursting. "Yes, Wyatt Anderson, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace marveled at how dramatically her life had changed in just a few short months. What had begun as a tragedy, being left alone and heartbroken beside her dead horse, had led her to a love and happiness she had never imagined possible. They were married on Christmas Day in the town's small church, decorated with evergreen boughs and candles for the holiday. Martha wept joyful tears as she watched her son pledge his life to the woman who had brought such happiness back to their family. Emma served as Grace's maid of honor, while Wyatt's foreman stood as his best man. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. As Wyatt led Grace in their first dance as husband and wife, he whispered in her ear, "Happy. More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. That night, they returned to the Circle Pine as husband and wife, to the east wing of the main house that Martha had insisted on renovating as a wedding present. As they stood on the threshold of their new home, Wyatt swept Grace into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Anderson," he said, carrying her across the threshold. "Home," Grace echoed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I like the sound of that." As spring returned to Wyoming, bringing new life to the land, Grace discovered she was carrying new life within her as well. The news of her pregnancy was met with jubilation from Wyatt, Martha, and Emma. A teacher and a mother, Wyatt marveled, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Is there anything you can't do, my love?" Grace smiled, covering his hand with her own. "With you beside me, nothing at all." In the years that followed, the Circle Pine flourished under Wyatt's management, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Grace continued teaching until their first child was born, a son they named Joshua, after Wyatt's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, followed by twin boys 3 years after that. Grace never forgot that terrible day when she had lost Daisy and found herself alone and desperate on the trail. But what had seemed like the worst moment of her life had led her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. On their 10th anniversary, Wyatt surprised Grace by taking her back to the hilltop where he had proposed. A sturdy bench now sat beneath the pine tree, with a small brass plaque inscribed with the words he had spoken on the day they met. "You'll never walk again alone." As they sat together, watching their children play in the meadow below, Grace leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Wyatt asked, his arm tightening around her. "For stopping that day, for keeping your promise." She smiled up at him. "For giving me a life more wonderful than anything I could have imagined." Wyatt kissed her tenderly. "Thank you for staying. For building this life with me." He touched her cheek. "I loved you from the first moment I saw you, Grace Anderson, and I'll love you until my last breath." As the sun set over the Wyoming territory, casting long shadows across the land they both cherished, Grace knew with perfect certainty that she had found her true destination that fateful day. Not Cheyenne, not a schoolhouse, but the arms of a man who had vowed she would never walk alone again and had kept that promise every day since.